Hi, Damian. I'm talking to Damian today, and Damian is an independent consultant. We've known each other for quite some years now, but I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Hi, Eve. Nice to see you again. We've known each other for about 10 years now, I think.
Yeah, 10 years.
Yeah, it's
Um,
fast.
I
We've
think the
been,
first. Go on.
I think we've been on this journey from the Belgium days back in where all just kind of started, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a talk by a colleague of yours on event sourcing and an event source application, and then replication of information across
Multiple
multi
regions,
multiple region
distributed, and
worldwide, and it was quite interesting.
all that fun stuff. So I've introduced. I'm Damien. I'm currently working as an independent consultant. Kind of shape myself to help teams and companies basically reshape, replatform, adopt cloud native, event driven architectures. Basically, I see that a lot of companies have made their cloud shift and now they realize they need to adopt, platforms and services and so forth. And yeah, this is an area I focus on.
Yeah,
And so serverless and events and integration and all sorts of fun things.
making the best use of the cloud offering.
That's usually what happens. They bring the stuff to the cloud and then they realize, oops, I have to operate it and I've got other costs. And delegating to cloud services, which our Venstore Cloud is a good example, is the sort of thing that I help teams with. And it's going well.
Yeah,
That's 2 years now. I've been
two
doing that.
years.
And prior to that, I guess I've worked in fintech. I've worked in product organizations. I've worked in software companies. I've done a variety of things. I've side from my fun side things of a little bit of open source stuff in the .NET. Not so much these days. I guess Nancy and a few other projects have been popular enough. And also, I set up and helped moderate the DDD CRS event sourcing Slack channel that you participate in, and
Yeah,
many of our colleagues actually.
yeah.
And
Many
it's
really good community. I will put or I'll let put the link to the invite there, because it's a really welcoming community and things can be talked about there. That,
it's a I think it's a safe space for exploration and learning. I think the kind of where that originated from back in the day was there was a Yahoo group, I think, called DDCQRS and so forth. And there's a number of us used to hang out on that. I think we set up a small channel on a thing called Jabber that came around. I don't know if you on Jabber.
no, I was not on
I was
Java.
on Jabber, so we then, you know, Jabber was dying for whatever reasons, and we decided to create a Slack, and all these community Slacks are getting started up. And a couple of our shared friends, like Yves Reno, I believe, and a few others from the D, and we just kind of started hanging out there. One of the nice things about it, I think, is that conversations do get deleted and disappear after a while.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say something noobish, it's not recorded forever. It can be it gets erased, and that's a feature. But some things, get repeated often, but that's okay. I like a bit of repetition. It helps focus the mind on whether your stance or position can be challenged, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's all the teaching and education part. That's from another life of me. If you want to know, I've been
that's right.
teaching martial art and something, and repeating the basics and being able to repeating the basics is essential. Because if you fly high and you can't help people lift up and to a certain level of knowledge, well, you're not doing a correct job according to me. So you need some. I mean, that repetition might seem boring to some people, but actually, I find it pretty essential to keep focused.
That's very interesting. Do you so like do you get frustrated repeating at all
Nope,
on aspects? Yeah.
nope.
Some people, yeah, some
So
people can find that. Some people won't find that tiring. Some people find that invigorating. It's an interesting
yeah,
aspect.
it's probably kind of down to personality and so on. But I think it's a good way to not forget, okay, we were there one day and we need to help people again and again, and new people again and again. And it's good. I mean, it's a good thing if people come ask those questions. It means, okay, they're on the correct path and they're asking the correct questions. So that's encouraging. I look at it as encouraging. The fact that I have to repeat to new people is encouraging, because it means, okay, the knowledge is spreading.
And you've seen how we have seen how that how things have changed even over the last kind of few years, as maybe certain practices were adopted from a certain blue book and they've evolved. Evolved in interesting ways. Also, how things get missed from the various studies over the years. And also, as people come in with I want to adopt event sourcing. And that's what's a nice thing about this community, is that some people come in and say, I want to adopt this, I want to adopt Y. And they come along with some theoretical, situation. And the community always goes, we don't really work with the theoreticals. Tell us what your actual problem is. And let us help, assist you modeling it. And it always turns out to be a different thing. It's always like, well, it's always the famous one, user registration, right?
Yeah.
But it's always you start probing a little bit, you can simplify things up and you go, well, this part here makes sense to be event source because the business is interested in capturing facts here. And this part, don't do that, right? Don't do it there. But the great thing about that community is that there's a lot of practical experience from the trenches over the decade. I think it's been really about a decade, 2010, when all this really kind of kicked off. So it's a wonderful place. So anyone who's watching this now, feel free to join, and stupid questions are encouraged, I think.
Yes. As long as it's a real stupid question, meaning the real problem and not some sort of
hypothetical. It's always
hypothetical.
It's always so I need to register users. Okay, here we go again. It's always to register users. But that's always a fascinating one when you start digging into this. So one of the projects I worked on in recent years was user registration, but it was something more along the lines of fintech KYC. Right. Okay, that's a deeper topic, right? Okay, so you have to validate addresses, and you have to do searches against criminal databases, and you have to do all sorts of other kind of interaction and things. Send an address comes back, address event received, tackle the next step. And so when you start looking back into some of these things, you're looking, okay, so we have a series of interesting things that occur. What's a good way to model that? And the time between things and so forth. So this is some of the kind of discussions we have, and we can, sometimes people say, well, don't event source this, which is fine. And other people say do, so.
Yeah. And I guess in your job, since we're on the topic of, I have something that are event source, something that are event driven, and maybe you should give me your thought on what's the difference between the two. And working in an existing system where you don't want to change everything, because that's not doable.
So event sourcing, I guess, if I were to, maybe, I might give it a different, I would actually probably possibly give it a different name if I had an opportunity to rename it. For me, it's really about within a well-defined boundary. Again, that's something that can be up to debate, that can be debated for hours as well. That the people that are interacting with it are interested in capturing facts on a timeline. Right. That's how that for me is the trigger moment. Now, as a consultant, I wouldn't push, say, event sourcing as a technology or top-down architecture or something like that. It's the trigger is always like, okay, so as a this, when something happens, I need to be able to capture that, and then when something happens, this, and I need to know when it happens between it. And you have these kind of paths of facts of timeline, and that's usually for me the trigger point when something like an event sourced approach would work. Event driven is just taking that, but probably a little bit of a different aspect. Event driven for me is definitely kind of a bit more like between context and systems. Something happens over here, someone's address has changed. Okay, anything in the warehouse that's being shipped might need to be might need to react to that and have it rerouted. Right?
Yep.
That's not event sort. That's just like, okay, things happen on the basis of other things occurring. People do tend to mix the two up a little bit. Event sourcing fits very well in an event-driven world, but you don't have to adopt it for that. There's other patterns like outboxes and so forth. But it does go very well, I think, when it makes sense.
Yep.
Generating event-driven things from event-driven, like integration to events from a domain is a very powerful tool in the back. But I wouldn't necessarily use it as a driver to say that we should be using event sourcing internally. It's a nuance, I think with that. I think you mentioned, what else did you mention there? Was event-driven and
EventSourced and no, you answered
no, that's the question. Yeah, so that's
you answered the question.
I also kind of focus a little bit on I do like serverless first.
Yeah,
I do like serverless first stuff. It's been that naturally is an event-driven system. Now,
yep.
there's kind of synchronous events, such as, I guess you can run web APIs inside, and I'm kind of more leaning towards, I'm talking about Amazon Lambda as the implementation of serverless here. So building serverless systems with event source systems is a very powerful paradigm. So all the platforms and services are available as projection targets, from document databases to search to graph systems and graph databases. So there's an area that I tend to work in, or tend to encourage a lot more through, if you're adopting event sourcing in the cloud, I'll definitely look at kind of serverless first based approaches.
Yeah, because also, I mean, the I think one of the confusion between event sourcing and event driven is they're kind of message based both, and
yes,
the type of pattern you use and the kind of issues you encounter and the kind of remedies you have to them looks really the same, but it's either on one sub system, let's say, versus whole systems that needs to talk to each other in some way.
So I think some of the biggest mistakes I've seen, one of the most kind of critical mistakes, is that the events you have within a certain well-defined bounded context often don't make sense outside of it. So if one adopts event sourcing to build an event-driven system, but you effectively use the same message contracts and message schemas on the inside as well as the outside, that normally leads to a bit of a bad time.
Yeah.
Especially because, like, on the outside, usually doesn't care about specifics of why something happened. They just know that X has been updated, whatever, and they want to react to that. But the lifecycle management is usually where things break down. So it always starts off on day zero. Oh yeah, I've got a message contract. I've got a message here. I'm just going to save it in an event store, and then I'm going to just put it on a bus somewhere, and then I'll have some other system integrate with it. And that's usually starts off fine, but then it deteriorates when your domain model evolves based on new business insights.
Yeah, and
now you're coupled to the outside world, right?
Yeah, and both are coupled, and I've seen that happen also in logistics, where too much of the details of some logistic process was published to the external world, while in the end the only thing of interest, okay, it's being shipped, it's
that's it.
It's on the truck. It's interesting. The rest you don't care.
Yes, and you have to design for that.
Yeah.
And also then, like, even so we start digging into the details a bit. I think event driven tends to be less, when it looks like a stream, the streams, they don't necessarily the same attributes as an event store stream. You have an event store database.
Yep.
Maybe ordering is not as important on the outside. Maybe you can have some flexibility with that. On the right side, you wouldn't. Well, you're publishing. You're not necessarily having some sort of doing pessimistic concurrency on your right, so you haven't got those constraints there. So that changes. And also then the way you design one would design your streams on the inside could be many streams around a concept, but on the outside it appears as it's a single stream.
Yep.
And that's usually, again, that's another area that is when you're starting off on these projects to get right at the start is and actually people fall into it, right? They just like they come from their ERD or they come from their database world and they have their tables and they go, well, these things are all strongly related because they've got, foreign key, key relationships and cascaded deletes and everything's like, consistent. And they just look at all these things and for their world, they're called entities. Now, unfortunately, the thing in the the domain-driven design world, they're also from the blue, but they're also called entities. These are slightly different things here. So you end up with these kind of large aggregates or large God classes that live forever, and they're massive long streams. And just because you think of it, it's a user, right? We've got a person. I mean, just the person is one big stream. And then we want to have integration events coming off that and just use the same domain. That's where things start to break down. And always like when we discuss these things in the channels, and you start like you need to talk to people about like the timeline of things, right? What happens here, what happens there. So a user is not a user. Maybe it's a prospect.
Yep.
Right. And when the prospect maybe needs to be qualified in a sales, and then the prospect becomes a customer, right? And then the prospect might become a support a contract thing, right? From the same perspective, it's all the same, maybe the same company or person or org, but these are different things and they have different life cycles. And always when you peel back the layers a bit, you go, well, they're a prospect for a week and a half before they're qualified. Okay, so the prospect has now moved to a different phase where it's become a lead or whatever, right? And people tend to, if you're doing that in an EventSourced way, which can make sense, you want to understand like how many leads you've got, how quickly can you turn a prospect into a lead, and all these kind of nice analytics. And people tend to, naively would do that as one stream, as one consistency boundary, rather than creating a new stream for the next phase.
Yeah,
and that's kind of led into that a little bit, but they're the kind of things that I guess will help. That's what you do as well, I'm sure as well. We tend to help customers understand, and they're building products like this.
Yep. That's one gotcha that people have to understand. Any other gotcha that you've seen in recent work where between it's like, okay, you're into event-driven architecture, okay, top level thing for the system, and sometimes you choose, if I understand correctly, sometimes you say, okay, this might be EventSourced, this small part of this full system, but this not. On any other gotcha on the integration level, on the header level?
It's always consistency.
Yep.
It's always the consistency, right? And not thinking about failure modes. The networks don't rely, stuff gets lost. something gets deleted or message gets dropped or there's a network. It's all it's the understanding the consistency and not designing for compensation. So you always fight if you talk to. It's weird. I have conversations with business analysts and various other things, and people tend to have a very absolute position about what a state should be in, and they don't really think about it in a kind of a flexible term or a temporary term, or maybe it wasn't the right state in the first place. We should go back. Maybe the prospect was not actually didn't a customer. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they returned the good and they weren't no longer a customer. They come back to be a prospect again. And how do you unwind things? So that tends to be that's what I see happens within bounded contexts themselves. That then sometimes leaks across systems, and basically just the gotcha is that the system is like a guard. It's not just like garden. It's something that's living, but has its flaws and its warts and it's missing. And I think just kind of accepting those attributes and just accept them as part of the business, and just basically catering for that in models. How do you revert something?
Yep.
Just simply revert something. This prospect is no longer the lead. Has been back to the prospect. How do you do that? And those sort of things tend to be overlooked a little bit, and a little bit it's overlooked, I think, is there's one of the things that people like about EventSourced in theory, which is the ability to rebuild read models and rebuild projections and rebuild this and rebuild that. And in practice, it doesn't seem to happen that much. Practice, it tends to not. It's a you see, if you notice, I'm hypothesizing a bit from my own experience, by the way. I'm not necessarily speaking for the world as
Yeah.
such, but they tend to the practice seems to be like, I think about the event store or stream or or whatever model you have it, and I think about its read model strongly, and they tend to get a little coupled in weird ways.
Yep.
And then it's a kind of a fixed thing, and creating new replaying doesn't seem to be as proliferate. That's not as used as much as I'd like to see it.
Yep.
In fact, is it a tooling problem? Is it a understanding problem?
I think probably both. There's probably some tooling aspect that can be that can come better. Though there are some libraries out there and other products that have facilities for that. But there's also, I think, I've seen it happen when things go wrong. When okay, we have that projections over there, and yeah, we database got corrupted or something, or some disaster.
It's an operational
Operation.
incident usually triggers that. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I think happens actually is that if there's an evolution in those read models, is that people tend to try to reuse the existing one instead of creating a new one. And I'm in favor of, okay,
Why is that?
I don't know. I think they probably think the read model has some sentiment or some property that makes you need to keep it alive. No, you can have another one, spin it up, make every new change version 2 of my read model, get it there, and then just remove the other one. And people don't tend to do that. They just want to update the existing thing. But I think it's, again, probably because of 20 years or 25 years of having to upgrade database. And
I think you've nailed it. It's the operational aspect.
Yeah. And the only time, for instance, okay, I have a new version of my system. I have changed scripts in my database. I'm adding new columns, making default values, blah, blah, blah. And it's a well understood problem. And the only time in such system when you actually have a new database is when you have a third-party product, and the third-party product says now, please upgrade now, or we don't support you anymore. And then you have like a new database and everything, and then you have like this gigantic migration project, which takes a lot of time, lots of effort.
This, I think you've articulated it really well here. I find if you're in a situation where you're doing maybe a project and it's, say, adopt event sourcing, and it's one of those kind of, I guess, throw it over the wall a bit in some form. Sometimes it's you're an agency, and other times it's a waterfall agile project, and you're not really connected to the living system as a whole.
Yep.
And you don't get the opportunity to go, I'm going to think about the evolution here as a set of steps.
Yep.
And do each step. I think, which is kind of the practice of continuous delivery, right? But so that is, so people still end up, people still kind of end up in the traditional, the DBA does the DBA work, the database scripts do the upgrade work. As DBA up, there's a downtime. There's a, scheduled window, and it's like you get to upgrade once a quarter, once every few months. I think one of the lessons that I've learned then certainly heavily in the last several years through the experiences, like event sourcing on-premise software, when you're deploying on-premise, is that model. And that's a difficult model to work with, because then you're actually not only dealing with versions of your bounded context or versions of your domain, you're just literally dealing with versions of your software and your underlying architecture and operational architecture just deployed everywhere. So I think if I were to kind of look at things, I think adopting these paradigms, I think you've nailed. I think you have to be somehow connected to the operation and running of your system, so you can do these steps.
Yep.
I don't know how to. I haven't figured out how to articulate that actually. That's something for us to chat about a lot more in depth over a beer, I reckon. But Is that something
Yeah.
you're experiencing, by the way, on as like, with your customers? Like, is it because I'm seeing that too? And are they able to? Are they doing it as projects, or are they building as living systems?
Some do, some don't. Depends really on context
Yeah,
but most of them are going that way. So to treat the system as a whole and
as a living system kind of thing.
as a living
Yes.
thing, and
Yeah.
how do we take steps to make it evolve? And again, in a previous life, I was architecting some high level ideas about how the system should look, and the first thing I did was, for instance, no, not the first thing, but it evolved like that, is okay, we have this set of capabilities now. How do I add new capabilities to it without breaking without breaking
Yes.
everything,
Yes.
or
Yes.
at least with knowing, okay, if okay, I have this new client that comes in and has some special needs. We break down those needs into that and that and that, and they become kind of components into the overall architecture. And sometimes it's dedicated, sometimes it's okay, that's the generic stuff, and it's playing like with those boxes. I mean, that's man, I'm describing architecture
It's the architecture.
and
Yep.
boxes in line, but
Boxes there,
that's it.
but how much is this is a people problem, right?
Yeah,
Um, how much of that is like, okay, you can do those, you can do the, oh yes, we should do replays, well,
yeah,
or we should, or these are the capabilities, but then you look back and go, okay, but what we have is some developers on this project for 6 months and then they're gone.
yeah, yeah.
And
That's a thing also.
you're like,
Uh,
or the purpose of this sort of approach is that you should be able to do incremental steps and evolve. And I think that's the now as an architect, I do look at organization and people a lot, much more so than in more recent years than I've done that I should have been doing in previous years. And it's Conway's law, right?
yep,
It's the system matches the communication structures of the org,
yep,
and changing the org is it's always one more most difficult thing. So I think that's one of the so back to your thing there. That would be one of the gotchas on this, but I don't think that's particularly to do with event sourcing. I mean, that's the same for
yeah.
every system, right? That's not a particular event sourcing foible. Life is easier uh, with an event sourced system if you can do continuous delivery and natural evolution,
Yep.
and you do design. To paraphrase our shared our friend Yves Lorphelin, design in the small and not have big large things that when they get touched or have massive impact.
Yeah, but that's for me one of the benefits of and both good event source system and good event driven architecture is everything is small and focused, or
Yeah,
should be small and focused.
or certainly small, big enough, but and small enough. We
Yeah,
don't the word microservices and all the rest of it has a bad name on this, but they represent a well-defined context of some sort,
yep,
or a role or responsibility. Yeah,
yeah,
but you can't. Yeah, I haven't. You need it's an ecosystem that's a living, right?
yep, yep. And the thing is, and you mentioned it, if you're on a project for 6 months and then are going, you don't see the system growing. You don't see where it has pain in growing, where it's growing well, and
Yeah,
the feedback loop is really important on
feedback
team
loop in
level
this
and
is
business level.
the industrial knowledge. You can do as much documentation as you want, and even representing it in code and so forth. There's industrial knowledge about the reasons and the trade-offs. The trade and everything's a trade-off when you're building these things, and those little trade-offs get lost.
Yep.
So I kind of think I think sometimes it's hard for people to pick up. It's more like kind of when they're being introduced, or if they have to pick up an event source system they've never seen before. How do you find? Do you find? I've been kind of reflecting a bit on the onboarding, the how easy can someone get into it.
Hmm.
And I haven't really got a good answer for that at this point. I'm still trying to boil it down to this is a thing that captures facts in a timeline.
Yep.
It's just like keep it like that, right? Just remove all the technical all the buzzwords and stuff like that. This happened and this happened, and there it is.
Yep.
right? And okay. So, but still, it's when you go beyond the individual components and how all these things interact with each other and the whole domain model, yeah, it's hard to try to rest. I think that's why people still like some places like data models. You can just go to the ERD diagram and it's got the generate the diagram, and that's it.
But I've seen really good people doing a really good model in ERD, and those are really valuable models that they are building. But they use and implement it in another way in EventSourced system. But I think it's two ways of looking at, and both I think are complementary. Because one is more state focused and the other is more change focused, or changes over time. But the eternal problem is capturing domain knowledge and passing on the domain knowledge, because
and that's
the mechanics,
that's independent of whatever the mechanics.
And that's independent of any system, and the trap people fall in, even in if you have a good relational model or using a good relational model, is they think the relational model is the thing, and it's not.
So it's always everything. The day zero. I call it the day zero problem. It always looks great when you're at the start. Does it stand the test of time is always where the things start to come.
So if I have one thing, and that's really for any kind of systems being built, go talk to user, go. I mean, go to man the help desk for one day. For a few months, go to the help desk, answer questions of people, because then you know the system.
So this is a very interesting point. I think this comes down to some developer, I guess, mentality. Is it develop? So being there, done that myself as a developer. Sometimes you just want to write code and be told, like, when to think about the technicals.
It's fine, huh? It's fine.
Which has a place, right? It has a place. But I think for this sort of stuff, that's not the right mentality, right? It's not going to get you very far. But again, I guess certain organizations encourage that style of thinking, right? Or that they have the certain incentives, or they have the structures in place that you come from a user, goes to some sort of business analyst, comes to a story point, and then there's a scrum master, and then there's I don't see that approach being usually very fruitful for domain model systems.
Yep.
Where you really we want to model what the users and the roles, and you just look and go, what do you want to achieve? And actually, one of my favorite techniques is that and this comes down to like both event sourcing and event driven. My favorite techniques is when I'm speaking to people about how something works. I always go, well, imagine we had no computers. Computers are gone, right? You've got a piece of paper, right? And you need to write some information on it, and you need to give it to somebody else, right? And that person needs to maybe do something with that information, then pass it to somebody else. And which is actually, funny enough, how a lot of businesses would actually work if their computer systems go down, right?
Yep.
But when you start talking to people about in that kind of frame, all these things make sense. So I posted that to that person, but that person didn't respond to me certain times, so I have to send him a follow-up post. But it takes 3 days to post it, then he responded to me within the 3 days, and you've got this sort of like, conflict of something occurring, and then okay, so say your bank has sent you a demand for something and you've adhered to it, but the settlement hasn't occurred in the time frame. They redemand it. Somewhere along the line, there's always a human that goes, I've got this piece of information that says this date. I've got this piece of information that says that date. I accept this one, and the other one goes away, and life moves on, right?
Yeah, and that goes back to the living system and what you said about things go wrong in systems, and they might need some compensation. What I've noticed as well is that people want automated compensation, and they never give a thought about.
That's a trap.
Okay, maybe just a human can enter something in a screen and be done with it.
Record the audit. This value says A. I'm going to make it B.
Yeah, and record that.
Put a note. right?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't even its own domain. Just want to know. I called the customer and we've agreed on this, and that's the end of that.
Yeah. And because that can, and especially for the more complex one.
The more complex it is, the more I think the more looser things should be. It's just like at any given moment, it's just like allow someone with maybe the right authority just to override the data and just say, I'm just going to set it to this. Life goes on. I think one of the applications I previously worked on was about capturing the state of the world, right? So you're planning your what things to do on in a factory or rig, right? So your software says, yeah, this valve should be open, and then you go down to it and go, it's closed. The software says it's open, but this thing says it's closed, right? No one knows how it ended up out of whack, but sometimes you just go, but capturing the fact it was out of whack, that's interesting.
Yep.
Right? That's the thing you want to capture in your business, not I've now said it, so I've just somehow reconciled the difference between the real world and the software world or the data world. And why is it out of whack? What were the difference between this? What impact is this in the system? And so it's not necessary. That's when you talk to users. Do you want things to be consistent, or do you want things to be eventually consistent? That's a silly question because everyone goes, "Oh, I want consistency." Eventually, consistency sounds difficult, but then you go like, "Okay, we've got paper and you got a valve. How would you reconcile this in the real world?" Well, I'd send someone down to take a look. So take a look, right? And
take a look. The paper says it's closed. And it needs to be open. The paper says it's closed. Oh, it's already open. Okay, make a note.
Yep.
It was already open. Check who opened it, because probably someone else had it in his own log. Open valve number.
So now you've got a procedure problem or a process problem or some sort of engineering issue, or maybe it's broken popped up.
And especially for if we're talking about factories.
So this is exactly. This is a lot of things. Like sometimes the domain model is actually more interesting about what goes wrong than what goes right.
Yep.
And you start digging into some things like that, you get all sorts of interesting insights. But you have to be able to say, all right, if I have my lovely, model that has all the invariants and like this rule and that rule and this rule and that rule and this, only these things can happen in this state, and then the world just doesn't work like that.
Nope, indeed.
Right, and you end up in a place where you just have to say, okay, I'm going to take a snapshot of the world and go back at it. I'm a bit of a interest in blockchain tech as well, just side thing. I'm not going to go on about it much, and there's all sorts of I won't talk about crypto and stuff like that, but people's I like the whole idea of this distributed ledger, this consensus, and there's some interest, especially across distrust parties that don't trust each other. But at the same time, you have to put information on it, right? So the information, okay, is immutable and can't be changed, and it's verified. But all you do is verify the information. You go back to the real world and go, well, actually, that delivery didn't actually happen. So while it got recorded, somebody did it. So the real world doesn't. The real world works against your model. Be flexible, I would say, would be the
and be flexible and let the model only model what needs to be useful for user, instead of trying to model the world when you don't need to.
That's a very Or as paraphrasing our friend of ours, Matthias, who actually paraphrased somebody else, I believe, was like corrected us on Twitter. All models are bad. Some models are more useful than others.
Yep. Who did that quote? But there's something missing in that statement. Is that no, it's not about that statement. It's about models. Something I never see explicitly expressed when building a model is this model has limits, and those are the limits. We assume this and this and this, which is something that you have, for instance, in science. Let's say I have some chemistry and some diagram in the chemistry. It will say pressure is constant and is so much.
Test in these parameters. It was validated under these conditions.
Yeah, and the conditions and the limits of validity of the domain. Because we speak about domain or subdomain, we don't speak about the limit. What's the limit of the domain? The validity limit of the domain.
Assumptions. Sometimes
assumptions
codified,
or choices like we believe. Okay, for this computation to work, we believe that this and this and this things are true. And you can have a system that decides, okay, I detect that those are not true. I will not do the computation. Please, human,
Yeah,
help me.
human, help me.
Yeah,
Human, put the new value in, please. Yes.
yeah,
So, and that again is say it's always the exceptions that are the interesting, right?
yep,
It's when things go wrong, and or it's when the model doesn't go to plan. That's where the interesting stuff happens.
yep, yep, yep. And we've talked about a lot of gotchas, good things that are about event-driven or event-sourced application, or yeah, what are the good things? Good things you've seen?
So I say if you get it right, decoupling of teams so they can deliver stuff some degree of autonomously, right? That's primarily that's one of the most benefits there. You want people to be productive, producible, effective, and creating things in a smaller way with nice seams between them. It seems to be it's a good model. It's a good model for that. That's one where I do see it working well. It doesn't. It's not without its complexities, but you get things to a certain size. You got to have these complexities naturally, right? Communication between teams, design stuff between teams. So that's and the usual aspects after that, some degree of scalability.
Yep.
And for me, this is the operational side of things on serverless architecture makes the operations fade a little bit into the background a bit as people can think about the design of things a bit more. They're less concerned about how they run or how to deploy, how to upgrade, or have to patch, or have to, do these things. So if you can delegate a lot of the operations away and just focus on the domain, it's the main one. But yeah, I would say but as always as an architect, like you come up with this thing should talk to this thing in this way, and then you go, but there's no team, and then the one team owns the whole thing, and then they don't want to talk in two different ways. And then you're like, okay, I'll do that. Or you have different teams and start fitting things. So that's where the things start to break down a bit. So I generally am careful with thinking about how these things fit, and then how can team dynamics change with them, so people can own their boundaries. But the trap is not getting the boundaries and the bounded contexts understood up front.
Yeah.
That's usually the trap for these things.
And any tips to how to at least make people think about it? Because I mean, you I guess in your current line of work, you manage. No, I don't know if you manage them, but you need to talk to a lot of teams for different product if you in different areas of the systems.
I tend to. That's a good question, and I haven't really reflected on how I can answer that. It's when I think when I try to frame it in ways that meets how they might understand it. So you don't come down with a tablet from like Moses and say, this is how we do event-driven stuff. You get a message, you do this. I kind of like to say, can you imagine being the person and you have to get this job done? Or something has occurred and you have to do this and that. How would you like to think about this, and how would that be? And what would you like? Okay, what do you want to see on screen, and what would you hit on next, and what do you want to what do you have to complete next? I think usually try to frame things at that level. And then when you get down to, okay, we've got we've got another actor, and they're sending messages. And, like, again, back to the paper.
Yep.
Always go back to the paper. If you go back to the paper, it always just, okay, I get it, or I understand it. Oh, have you thought about this? And then you get the conversation flowing. Yep. And you get okay, I see what responsibility happens over here because it's over in that, either that physical location, or it's that responsibility for that role, or it's, it's the shipping area, or this is the, the warehousing area, or this is the, the financial department, and they see it like that. And you can see the different, helping people see perspectives. I think actually that would be how I'd phrase it. Try to help see the perspectives of how a system looks. That really helps with the whole ubiquitous language side of things. And something that's not one of those grand terms that we like to throw around the community. Oh, it's ubiquitous language in this. So, I don't know, just let's pick a word. Now, as in this area, what does it mean to you? What do you think it means? And you show what it means a bit. Okay, you show the same word in a different area, and okay, well, that's what ambiguous language is. It's not hard. It's just a customer from finance different from a customer from shipping.
Yep.
And okay, and once you get the rapport on those kind of meeting, it's you gotta talk to people, right? Yep. It's not a technical thing; it's a people thing.
Yeah. Yep.
And being able to speak with people on these things is the win, right? And that's including people in different roles in an org, from the business, the scary business. Once you just talk to them on words that they get, it's gets very easy.
Yeah.
Don't ask them about consistency or eventual consistency. Just ask them about, if I ship something and needs to be returned, what happens next?
Yeah, that's
how you speak, right?
Go speak to people. That's I think we're about the time we had allocated, but that's
fine.
That's a real good one. Go talk to people and
go talk to people. If I'm going to finish this, go talk to people.
Yeah,
talk to people, and don't be afraid just to go out. Actually, I do a little technique and trick I've been doing over the years that I might share with people. If you're working in a company with all these different parts, right, different value streams, and grab somebody buy them a coffee, ask them some questions, and people are usually fairly delighted to have a coffee and a chat and go, okay, so what kind of problems are you having? And how do you see that problem taken to that? And is this a product? Is this thing helping you? Okay, and you just get these wonderful insights. But not only that, you also get like wonderful support over the longer run when you start trying to make changes and trying to introduce solutions. So I was sign off on this. It's a people problem. It's always been a people problem.
It's a people problem, and the best way to solve them is go talk to them.
Go talk to them.
Ask questions.
Ask questions.
Don't try to find answer right away. That's maybe.
Oh yeah, don't ask them. Don't ask them. Don't actually. No, that's right. Don't ask them what their problems are. Just ask them, how are you getting on, and does that work for you, and what did you think?
Yep.
Don't come to them and go, well, how would you solve it? Don't ask them how they'd solve it. Just you have to frame it that way. Yeah, that'd be very good advice.
Yep. So, thank you very much, Damian, for your time.
You're very welcome. Hope to see you again. Hope to see you face to face soon.
And face to face soon, I do hope so.
It's been a tough couple of years on that front.
Yes. I hope it's getting better. Anyway.
And very best of luck with your new role in Event Store. And the very best.
Thanks. That's a completely different role, but maybe that's a private
conversation. It's a people problem, right?
No. Everything is. I mean,
I've a lot of friends
fine over there.
Pass my regards to the team.
Yeah. Okay. I will pass it on. Thanks, Damian.
You're very welcome. Take care. Bye bye.